Hey folks, this is the first of several videos dealing with this particular section on exponential functions. Notice that I have the equation of my function written over here, and I've just used an a, but yet when I go to graph it, notice that my a is not an a, it's a 2. So I need you to understand, first of all, that the parent graph is going to be some number raised to the x power. So it could be a 2 to the x, a 3 to the x, a 10 to the x. Any number raised to the x power for the parent. A couple of rules about that a value, that number that I'm talking about. First of all, it has to be positive, so a has to be greater than 0. And secondly, a is not allowed to equal the number 1. When you think about it, 1 to the x power is just 1, so that would be a really boring graph. Now, we're going to graph the parent 2 to the x power, even though this is going to be very similar to any of the other ones that I mentioned, 3 to the x, 4 to the x, whatever. But in order to do this, I am going to plug in the two x values of 0 and 1 to my function. So if I plug in a 0, that's going to be 2 to the 0 power. We know that anything to the 0 power is always going to be 1. So I'm going to have the coordinate 0, 1. And then secondly, if I plug in a 1, 2 to the first power is going to be 2. So I'm graphing the coordinate 1, 2. This particular function cannot be negative. There's no x value that I can plug in that's going to cause it to be negative. So that means I'm going to have a horizontal asymptote on the x-axis, and I'll have no graph below that. The left side of my parent is going to get closer and closer and closer and closer to my asymptote. The right side of my parent almost looks like a parabola. It's going to get up there very quickly. Just a side note, this particular coordinate right here, if my parent had been 3 to the x, that would be the coordinate 1, 3. If that had been 10 to the x, the coordinate would have been 1, 10. So just understand that that particular value is going to change depending on the base of my function. Now I can easily find my domain and range. So I can see here that my domain is going to be negative infinity to positive infinity. My range, the lowest value is 0, but I'm not actually touching 0. So my bottom value is from 0 all the way up to positive infinity. I already talked about the y-intercept because the y-intercept was one of those special coordinates that I put on my graph, 0, 1. And my horizontal asymptote occurs on the x-axis, which is at y equals 0. I've also referred to this particular word. A is going to be called my base, whereas x is my power or my exponent. My base is going to be known. I use several examples, a 2, a 3, a 10. But my power is my variable. It's my unknown value.